Hey everybody, welcome back. So for the next installment of the series of videos, we're going to be tackling phonology. Phonology is the study of the systematic patterning and organization of speech sounds in a language. We're not going to be talking about everything in phonology, obviously that would be too long for this video, but we are going to focus in on one of the trickier concepts. What's the difference between a phoneme and an allophone? In my experience as a student and as a teacher of introductory linguistics, these are maybe the trickiest concepts in this course because we're taking an abstract thing, language, and making it even more abstract. But it really is important to understand the difference between these two concepts because it will be important for understanding things in morphology and syntax and beyond. So before I go any further, I also want to say that in order to understand phonology, it's really important to have a strong understanding of phonetics. So a lot of the things we covered in the previous video on how linguists describe consonant and vowel sounds, how to navigate the International Phonetic Alphabet and the IPA chart, to start to get some confidence in performing broad phonetic transcription. Obviously, you're not experts yet, that's totally okay, but you want to start getting comfortable using these terms to describe what your articulators are doing in the vocal tract when you're producing a sound. All of that is going to be really important to understand things in phonology, and especially with phonemes and allophones. Well, what is the difference between phonemes and allophones? Let's start with the concept of a phoneme. So, a phoneme is a mental, abstract representation of a speech sound. I know, sounds complicated. We'll get there in a moment. So when linguists are talking about phonemes, we always put the phoneme itself in between slashes. That basically says this is a mental category. It is only a psychological reality. So whenever we're, as human beings, using language, we're never producing phonemes. It only exists in our minds. When we're actually speaking, though, that's when we use allophones. An allophone is the phonetic realization of a phoneme. So each phoneme can be realized as one or more different allophones depending on the environment in which that sound appears. So for the sake of simplicity, let's just take a couple. So we have this category of T, the phoneme T. When it is actually spoken or pronounced as an allophone, it could maybe take on one of these allophones rather than the other. The concept of allophones is a lot like Clark Kent and Superman. You only get Clark Kent or Superman. You don't get either one. You don't get both appearing at the same time in the same place because they're the same person, right? So if it's in an office building, it's somebody working on a story, there's nothing exciting happening, who are you likely to get? Probably Clark Kent. But when there's a disaster happening and people are scared for their lives, who do they call? Superman, right? So they appear in very predictable environments. That's the thing about these allophones, is you'll see that they are predictable where they're going to happen. They are in complementary distribution, so that's predictable when they're going to happen. You don't get Clark Kent and Superman in the same place, just like you'll see you don't get either of these sounds in the same place in English. So let's take a word like stop, and let's take a word like top in English. You might think that both of those words have the same T in them, but they don't. They're actually two different sounds. So, for instance, if we take this first one, what we call an unaspirated stop, that happens in words like, well, stop. Whoops. So remember, this is the phonetic transcription, S-T-A-P, so it's really important to get comfortable using the IPA. Forget about the English spelling system. It's a hangover from Old English. I digress. Alright, so we have an unaspirated T here, whereas in the word top, if you're a native English speaker, you're actually producing that with an aspirated T sound. What's the difference between aspirated and unaspirated, you may ask? Aspirated sounds produce a little puff of air after the sound, whereas unaspirated sounds do not. So if you put your hand in front of your mouth, and you can do this at home because nobody will be embarrassed if they see you doing this, if you say top, top, you should feel a little puff of air after this t sound, whereas if you say the word stop, stop, you shouldn't feel that puff of air or not near as much air. That's what linguists call unaspirated. But the crucial thing about these allophones is that if you switch those sounds around in that environment, it does not result in a change of meaning. So we have this particular environment here in English, and I'll put the blank to signify there's a lot of different sounds you could put in there. So you could put an aspirated sound, an aspirated T, which is represented with the superscript H, or an unaspirated T. Either one of those, it doesn't result in a change of meaning. So whether I say this first one as in, I'm on top of the world, or if I say the unaspirated variety as in, I'm on top of the world, it doesn't result in a change of meaning. We're still talking about the same word. It's just that when I use the unaspirated T sound, it sounds a little weirder. It sounds like maybe a non-native pronunciation of the word. Doesn't change the meaning though. Phonemes, however, they are in what's called contrastive distribution, which means that they can produce a change in meaning. So you might remember back in the design features video and in your readings in class, we talked about the design feature of discreteness, how language is built on a finite number of consonant and vowel sounds, and how each of those sounds individually is meaningless, but when they combine with other sounds, that's when they take on meaning. So again, each of these sounds, meaningless. But when you combine them with other sounds, now we're talking about top, the apex, or what have you. So how do you know then, if you're looking at two sounds in a language and you're wondering, well, are these allophones of the same phoneme or are they two different phonemes? There's actually a couple of tests that you can use. The best one is what's called the minimal pairs test. So a minimal pair in a language are two forms, two words that are the exact same except for one sound. So let's take, again, this environment here. And then at the beginning, well, we could have t, like top. But instead of that, let's say we put in the sound p. Well, then we have pop, like pop goes the weasel. So this is basically telling you that because you switch the sounds p and t, and it results in a change of meaning, top versus pop, those are two different words with two different meanings. Therefore, p and t, they must be two different phonemes in English. Or, more specifically, they are two allophones of two different phonemes in English. So again, that's why with something like pop and top, it tells you change of word, change of meaning, they must be two different phonemes. But here, with an aspirated T or an unaspirated T, it doesn't change the meaning. We're still talking about top. So there's many other allophones for T in English. For example, there might be a glottal stop, as in the word kitten. Some people say the word kitten. Isn't that a cute kitten? You could say kitten if you want. So it doesn't change the meaning of the word. It just results in a different pronunciation. You could maybe have a tap or a flap in there, like in the word butter. You could say butter if you want. Maybe sounds like a more British pronunciation. It doesn't change the meaning though. Or you could even have what linguists refer to as an unreleased stop. And this very often happens in an utterance final position, like, hey, where did you get that cat? And your tongue just stays at the alveolar ridge, it doesn't actually release. So you could mix and match all of these sounds and put them in different words. It's not going to change the meaning of that word, just like we saw with top and top. So, in a very brief way, that's essentially the difference between phonemes and allophones. Phonemes are contrastive. They can change meaning when you switch one sound with another sound. If you do that and it results in two different words with two different meanings, you're talking about two different phonemes. And if, like in this word, top, you switch the sounds around, but it doesn't result in a change of meaning, maybe just a different pronunciation, that tells you that those sounds in question are allophones of the same phoneme. So, that in a nutshell is the difference between phonemes and allophones. Again, if you can get through this part of phonology, then you've probably got through one of the trickier parts of the class. Hang in there. Let us know if you have any questions. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks.